Okay, the topic of the Sugya SHIUR tonight is called Neiros Channukah Mitzvah on the person or on the house. This is a classic Sugya, an oldie but goodie. But it's a very important one because it has very important nafkaminas la'alacha, very important ramifications in halacha. Just to mention two, which we're actually going to see brought out, highlighted in tonight's SHIUR. If I'm traveling and I want to light the menorah, like this year's mission is going to be flying to Eretz Yisrael, one of the nights of Hanukkah, what are we supposed to do? And as we'll see, it depends. If the mitzvah is on me as a human being to light the menorah, then maybe I should light on the airplane, right? But if the mitzvah is to make sure that my house has a menorah, then as long as someone's lighting in my house, I'm covered. Another very important ramification is going to be the halacha of, normally we say that there's more of a mitzvah for the person to do it himself than his shaliach. When a person lights menorah for me, is it a din of shlichus, or is there something else that's going on? More specifically, let's say, for example, by Mikra Megillah, we know that we prefer, even though women can fulfill the mitzvah of Megillah, we don't permit, when everything is optimal, a woman to lane for a man, the Megillah. Can a woman light Hanukkah candles for her husband, or is there some kind of less than optimal scenario in that situation as well, just like we say by Megillah? You'll see that how all of these things tie together once we get clarification on what the mitzvah is. Is it on the gavra or on the bayis, on the man or on his house? Okay, so let's take a look at some Gemaras and we'll start to unfold this. It starts really with a tshuva from the Trumas Hadeshen, the Maharoi from the 14th century, really acts sort of to unpack this issue very carefully. But the prefatory Gemara is Amar of Sheshis, Ach Sanoi Chayiv B'ner Chanukah. The Gemara in Shabbos says that a guest who's lodging at someone else's home or someone else's hotel has an obligation to light Neiros Chanukah. Amar Rabbi Zera, Meiresh ki havina beirav, mishtatfana bepriti bahadi ushpiza. Rabbi Zera said that initially, when I was a guest at the house of Rab or at the yeshiva, I would contribute money to their menorah oil so that I could be considered to be a shutuf together with their Hanukkah candles, which is what a person is supposed to do if you're staying at someone's house. You're a guest at someone's house. We'll see in Shulchan Aruch. You're supposed to contribute to their neiros, to their oil, or to whatever. You give them a quarter, you give them a $50, whatever it is, so that now you become a shutaf with their menorah. Now, what exactly that accomplishes, we'll see. But it's based on this Gemara. But Basar dinasibi itza amina. But once I got married, and I would stay over the yeshiva overnight, okay, which was a very common practice. You get married and say goodbye to your wife for 6 months and say, I'm going to learn the Beis Medrash, and I'll see you in a while. And then you come back a few weeks later, right? So once I got married, however, hashta vadei lo tzrichna. Now I don't need to be mishtatef with the menorah where I am right now, dekam madliki alai begav beisai, because they're lighting for me in my home. So because they're lighting for me in my home, I no longer have an obligation to be part of the lighting where I am. Now, as we'll see, there's still a mitzvah of Pirsumei Nisa for me to witness and to celebrate the lighting of the menorah where I am, but my kiyum of the mitzvah is not where I am, but rather relying on the fact that they're lighting for me at home. The poskim still say, it's not like you should hide when they're lighting menorah where you are. You should be a part of the Pirsumei Nisa. There's a mitzvah of publicizing the miracle that I should still be a part of. But the primary mitzvah, which is Hadlakas Haneros, that's taken care of by my wife and my family at home. I don't have to be there. I don't have to be present for that Hadlaka. Okay? So we're already seeing something unique about the mitzvah of Hadlakas Ner Chanukah, which is that normally, in order to be part of a mitzvah, even if you're using a shaliach, it's normally preferable for you to be present. Here, no, you don't have to be present. Whoever's taking care of it at home, they're taking care of it for you.
That's on the assumption that you're in the same time zone?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't think it really makes a difference. Although I did see this shaila brought down in a sefer, does it make a difference that you're in a different time zone? I don't believe it makes a difference because it's dependent upon where my shaliach does the mitzvah. Whether this is a din of shlichus or not, we're going to see it's actually not so much a din of shlichus, but rather because it's the fact that my house has the chiyuv and not myself. So time zones we don't really reckon with in halacha when it comes to a mitzvah being performed on my behalf in a different time zone, but it's a very interesting point. Okay. So let's take a look at this Truma suggestion. It's in Siman Kuf Aleph. He says, She'ela. The question is as follows. Achsanoi shehu nasoi rashayhu lahadlik bebracha chutz lebeso olav. So the Truma Sadesh was asked the following question based on this Gemara that we just saw. Let's say I'm learning in the yeshiva for a few weeks and it's over Channukah. My wife is lighting the menorah for the family at home, but I want to partake of. I want to make a bracha. I want to do it. I know I'm patur. I know that my wife can exempt me, but I want to have a chelik in the mitzvah anyway, and I want to make a bracha where I am. I want to light my own menorah. Is that okay? So tshuva, the Truma Sadeshin says, Yeira'ed tzarich ledakdek badavar. So first he says, we have to look at this very carefully. Echad mehagdolim hora v'nahag derashay lahadlik b'bracha. So he says, one gadol paskind, it's perfectly fine if you wanted to make a bracha, go right ahead. The Omar, afal gav the amrinam b'gemara dekevin dinasivna amina hashtavad elot tzrichna. And what about the Gemara where Rabbi Zera said, I used to think that I had to give prutas and now my wife's lighting for me, I don't have to. He says, Hainu delo michayev, avol iboi motzi lahadlik. He says, that's only that to tell you that you're not obligated to light the menorah, but if you want to, you have every right to do so. What about the bracha levatala aspect? If the mitzvah is already being fulfilled on my behalf, then what rights do I have to make a bracha? So he says as follows: Dahabinami bichlal hamahadrin. We know that there's this concept of mahadrin and mahadrin mina mahadrin, right? So what is mahadrin? Mahadrin is that first of all, the ikr mitzvah is ner yishu beso, and the mahadrin is that everyone lights their own separate menorahs. So everyone can light their own separate menorah. It's not a problem. If you want to be one of the mahadrin, then go right ahead. You have a right to do so. And furthermore, said this particular gadol, another compelling reason not only to permit you to light, but even also to suggest that it's a good idea for you to light, even when your wife is lighting at home, is who's to say that she's going to remember? Maybe she'll forget. Yeah? Va'amar shekain irlo pam echas di'ihu lo midlak mishum dahava samechala. And he says, this gadol writes, he says, the taka happened to me once, that I was relying on my wife, so I didn't light the menorah. She was relying on me, she thought I was lighting the menorah, and she didn't light. And it ended up that night, no one lit the menorah. So he says, based on his own personal experience, he says it's a good idea. V'nechlak alav echad mehagedolim talmido. And then the Truma Sadeshin says that one of this gadol's students, who's also a gadol, disagreed with his Rabbi. Va'amar dahol v'lo tzarich upater min hadavar im kein hayanikra hedjo tim yaseh. He said that Lamaisa, if I'm exempt from doing a mitzvah and I make a bracha on it anyway, then we find many times that the Gemara calls that person a hedjot, a simpleton, for acting excessively when he's not obligated to. The kol shekain dahavi bracha levatala, and he says, and the student said also that beyond being just a simpleton, a commoner, it's also a problem of making a bracha levatala. He says because kevan delo ashkechan mahadrin ze betalmud ad kan divreha, because the only kind of mahadrin that we have is when you want to have other members of the family in your home light. But for you to be able to light somewhere else, or for you to add additional neiros every single night, but for you to yourself go ahead and light somewhere else, that we never find that Chazal advocated as one of the mahadrins. You can only do an act of mahadrin, of beautification of the mitzvah, when the Gemara advocates that kind of beautification. But this kind of chumrah is not advocated by the Gemara. So if you're machmir, when the Gemara doesn't offer that as a chumrah, then you're making a bracha levatola. That's what this rabbi had suggested. Venira de'oso tam. So now the Trumas Hadeshen, looking at this machlokes between the rabbi, the Gadol Aleph, and the Gadol Beis, who's his student, and seeing the back and forth, he now comments and puts his own input in. Venira de'oso tam shomer echad mehagdolim harishonim di'ikal amechash dil mamishali inshi basic. He says, now let's look at that concern that this rabbi, the first Gadol, had. That he advocated that the man should light away from home because maybe your wife will forget to light for you. And he says that Ataka happened to him once. He says, Ein ta'am ze maspik klal. He says that's not a good reason. That's not a reason to advocate lighting away from home. He says, just because you had a personal experience where Nebuch, you forgot and your wife forgot, doesn't mean that we completely jettison the Talmudic rules about such halacha. When it comes to the rules about reliance on others, the Gemara does allow us to rely on other people who have a cheskes kashrus to fulfill a mitzvah when they're supposed to. And he gives afilo iser kares, even when there's an iser kares at stake. And he says, I'll give you an example. Ki ahi deper kol hayad debala machshav yemei vesta uba aleha. There's a Gemara Nida that says that if a man knows exactly when his wife got her period, then he's allowed to count 7 days from that point onwards, and he can have marital intimacy with her without having to ask her if she went to the mikveh. Why is that? He says, "V'hatam mishum da'asur lamo b'mei tumasa." He says, "V'lo arinan dilmatos irala v'shachacha," because we can assume that a wife knows when she became a nida, and she also is very careful to go and purify herself as soon as the first available opportunity, and we don't have to worry, maybe she forgot to go. So even though there's an Isser Kares at stake over there, we still rely on the fact, I can rely on the fact that my wife went to mikveh. I don't have to ask her explicitly, at least according to the Dina de Gemara. So if that's the case, hachanami, imhu yodea beishto shehi yodas din zeh she'aisha tzricha lahadlik begat beisa. So he says, if I know that my wife is a knowledgeable Jew, and she knows the halacha that she's got to light the menorah in the house, lefisha hamitzvah mutelas al mishu b'husoch abayis, because the mitzvah is incumbent upon the person inside the house. O afilu imena yodas, avol b'nei beisa yodim din zeh o shecheneha, and he goes even further. He says, even if my wife is illiterate and she's not familiar with the halacha, but there are other people in my house, let's say I have children who go to cheder and they know the halacha. Or let's say my neighbors know the halacha and they know that I'm out of town and they'll remind my wife that she has to light. Yesh lismoch aleha. You can rely on the guests, on the other members of the household, on the neighbors. Afilu im ira pamechas tos lo cheshinu mishum hachi lezimna achrisi. And he says that's true. So Rabbi Gadol that said, it happened to me once and I forgot, so it's not a good idea to light. He says, come on, that was a fluke. You don't use personal experience to change the halachic norms. It was a fluke that you forgot and your wife forgot. Okay, fine, but that's not a reason to make a bracha levatala. If there's taka no inyan of you lighting the menorah outside your home, then that's not appropriate for you to do. I'm skipping a little chunk of the Trumas Hadesh, and we're going to go to the end of the tshuva now. He says, Amno mita mahadrin. However, let's look at the mahadrin aspect. Remember, we said that this other gadol said that we don't say mahadrin. We don't say that we'll make up our own mahadrin. Just like we see that there's a mahadrin that other members of the household should light, and you should add candles every night. But we don't make up our own mahadrin that a guy that's away from home should light with a bracha. So he says, Efshir v'yitachen shatr dami lahadlik bebracha ki hagavna. So there the Trumas Hadeshin says, I think that Gadol Aleph has a good point. The first Gadol, I think he makes a good point. That you can say mahadrin. He says, D'chihecha diyesh hider b'ner l'chol echad ve'echad b'bayis echad, just like there's a mahadrin aspect when every person in the household lights, even though the primary mitzvah is one menorah per house, nevertheless, hachanami yesh hider b'ner leish v'ner leishto b'shnei makomos. I don't see any distinction. If we allow a husband and a wife to light when in the same house, then we can also say that there's just as much of a mahadrin aspect of beautifying the mitzvah and enhancing the mitzvah. If my wife is in the house and I'm away, that's also a mahadrin. What about Gadol Bez's argument that it's not identified in the Gemara as one of the mahadrin things that you can do? He says because it's not common. It's not common for a person to be away from home and leave his wife alone for the hadlakas nera shel Channukah. That's why it's not mentioned. The kaven the ashkechon betalmud mahadrin mina mahadrin ein ze kemosif al hatalmud shehu goreya. And now that we see that the Gemara advocates adding on and being machmir as much as possible for the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, then you're not considered to be doing something incorrect by adding on and being machmir. Just the opposite concludes the Trumas Hadeshen, that you should go right ahead if you want to. You can be away from home, and even though you know that your wife is lighting the menorah, you can light your own menorah. Everything will be fine. Go ahead and make the bracha, light your own menorah, and gesundheit. Your wife will have lit for the household, and you'll have lit where you are with the bracha. It's no problem. So the question is, what do we do with this Trumas Hadeshen? Is this how we paskin? So it's not so simple. Okay. So the Torah tells us the basic din of the Gemara, that if you're a guest in someone's house, you should give them some money to be mishtatif with their neros. But he says, but if they're lighting for you in your house, you don't have to light on your own, because you know that your wife is lighting for you. Comes along the Beis Yosef on that Siman Tafresh Ayin Zayin, source number 4, and he says as follows: Kasav b'Trumas Hadeshen, what we just saw, the Achsanai shehu nasui im rasa lahadlik ulevarich mishum hider shaper dami, that the Trumas Hadeshen's conclusion, as we saw, that you do have a right to light even when they're lighting for you at home. And note that the Machaber disagrees. The Beis Yosef disagrees with the Trumas Hadeshen, and he says, no, I don't think it's a good idea. It's a bracha she'ein tzricha. He's not even necessarily prepared to call it a bracha levatala, but he says it's definitely an unnecessary bracha. It'd be an interesting shiur to see what the difference between a bracha she'ein tzricha and a bracha levatala. That's a different sugya. But the fact of the matter is, the Machaber's conclusion is not a good idea. Does not advocate. If you know your wife is lighting the menorah at home, you want to light the menorah gesundheit, but don't make a bracha. It's not appropriate. Okay, so let us go on. Page 2. Darkei Moshe, which is the forerunner for the Ramah, disagrees. Quotes the Maharil, who says that it's perfectly fine, and he says especially. First of all, he says an achsanoi can be mishtatev. He says, but then he writes that cost of aminik kedivrei maharoi. But he says the minhag is like the Trumas Hadeshen, that we do allow a person to light with a bracha, no matter where he is, even when his wife is lighting at home. We paskin in the Shulchan Aruch in source number 6. Yesh omrim she'af al pisha madlikin alav b'soch beiso imhu b'makom she'im bo Yisrael madlik b'brachos. So first you have the halach in the Machaber, that even though there are those who say, he says, that even though the people are lighting for you at home, if you are in a place where no other Jew is lighting the menorah, then there are those who say that you can light with brachos. So here the Machaber equivocates, and he says, well, it depends. I'm not prepared to allow you to light the menorah when you're at a place where someone else is lighting. But because of the Trumas Hadeshen's kula, I'm prepared to let you light if you're in China. There's probably a lot of Jews in China, but I'm saying that nowadays. But if you find yourself in a place in Yehudatville that no one else is lighting the menorah, you're out in the middle of nowhere, for business, and you're the only person there that's available, then I'll give you permission. This is according to the Eish Omrim, but not under any other circumstances. Comes along the Ramah and says, he says that's the minhag, but he says va'afilo imhu eitzel Yehudim v'roa neros imrot salahachmer latzmo lahadlik b'fnei atzmo madluk u'mavarech aleihem v'cheino again. The Ramah disagrees. He says, no, even if you're with other Jews, you're at a Chanukah party, and you're at a guest at someone else's home, and you want to light the menorah, even though they're lighting for you at home, go right ahead and light and make a bracha, gesundheit. Now what?
It's just strange because he's quoting the Beis Yosef is of course, the Mechaber.
Yes.
And so I understand what's happening here. The Mechaber is paskening, but he himself already said in the Beis Yosef that it's a bracha she'ein tzricha.
Correct.
So I mean, who's he quoting on the issue?
Yes, he seems.
Paskening.
He seems to be backtracking just a little bit, not completely.
No, right. But he raised a significant concern, and then he seems in the Mechaber to.
Right. Correct. By the way, I just want to clarify: we're not talking about when you're in town and going to a Chanukah party, right? Because then the poskim say that if you're going to make it home at a decent hour, then for sure you shouldn't light at someone else's home. You have an obligation in your home to light. So you're on the road, you're traveling, and you're not going to make it home that night. That's where the Ramah says, go ahead, you have every permission to light with a bracha. So take a look at the Taz. And the Taz has a really serious problem with the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef clearly is unhappy with the Trumas Hadeshen, and really would prefer that you didn't light with the bracha. He just says that if you really feel bad and you want to light with the bracha, okay, we'll give you permission, provided that you're the only one there. Okay. So the Taz on source number 7, I'm coming into the middle of the Taz because it's even longer than the text that you have in front of you. He says, Amnam ki nechsi anan nir'im divrei trumas hadeshen and nechonim. He says, but let's, when we look into this carefully, it would seem that the Trumas Hadeshen makes a lot of sense. That you should be allowed to light, even though your wife is lighting at home, and you should be allowed to make a bracha. He says, what about the fact that one of the Gedolim in the Tshuva said, we don't find such a Mahadrin in the Gemara? He says, that's not a good argument. He says, the only time the Gemara discusses the Mahadrin aspect is only when it comes to something that's unique to Nero Shel Chanukah. But this issue of my wanting to do my own mitzvah instead of relying on my wife, that's not something that's unique to Neiros Chanukah. That's a universal concept. That if someone can do the bracha for me, or someone can do the mitzvah for me, and I have the option of doing it myself, what's wrong with my saying, I want to do the mitzvah myself? I prefer to do the mitzvah myself. And like he says, Kamo kan, harishus nesuna la'adam lasos kirtzonu, im rotze yotze bebracha shabad lekas ishto, v'im eno rotze, yavarach bifnei atzmo. He says, what's wrong with a person saying, if I want to, I can rely on my wife's bracha, but if I want to, I want to make my own bracha. I have a right to say, I'm not going to rely on my wife. He says, V'nira l'damos davar zeh l'mashakosav reish perik gimel sha'achlu, amar Rabbi yishnayim sha'achlu mitzvah l'chalik, u'pirish Rashi ben birkas zimun ben birkas hamotzi. Let's compare this to a Sugya in Maseches Brachos, that when you have two people, so you don't have a zimun, you have two people eating together, Abaye says that each person should make his own bracha, both the hamotzi and benching they should do separately. The kosav harosh, ha'olam lo na'agu kain. The Rosh writes, that's not the minhag, that in the Rosh's time, one person would lead the hamotzi, would make the hamotzi for the other person, and one person would lead the benching. The Gam Barashi lo shamanu shenagu came bebirkas hamotzi, and even Rashi would have to acknowledge that was not the minhag, that both people make their own hamotzi. Usually one person had the bread and he made the hamotzi for the other person. V'chein bo'ubda debar kaparach uli harei dal kopanim leke iser bedover in mevarich kol echad hamotzi. El harsharosh kosav shelo na'agu kain. The only machlokus is whether this is the minhag to do so or not, but it doesn't seem like they're saying that you can only do one way and not the other. Aval chas v'shalom sheyomer harosh denikra bracha levatala. You can't tell me that according to the Rosh, if the two people decide to make the bracha separately, that it would be a bracha levatala. What if you and I are sharing a meal together, and I decide, you know what, I appreciate your offer to make a bracha for me, but I choose to make my own hamotzi. Would you call that a bracha levatala? So how can you suggest that just because I want to light my own menorah and I want to make the bracha myself, that since my wife is offering to make the bracha for me, I have to be yotze with her bracha? Doesn't seem to make any sense. Shaharei Rashi hichnis davar zeh afilu bichlal mitzvah. Not only that, but Rashi even says that it's considered to be preferable. It's like a mitzvah for each person to make his own bracha. V'su, I'll give you another example, he says. Matzina b'birkas yotzer or b'feirush, or b'feirush. I'm not sure what nun tes means over here, or maybe it's daf nun tes. Shuvas harosh, ani omer osa im shatz benachas. Afal pi she'im shama mishatz yotza. He says, the Rosh writes in one of his tshuvas that even though the Shliach Tzibur says out loud the bracha, Birchas Kriyashma, Yotzer HaMa'oros, he says, I say it quietly together with him. And the Rosh says that even though I know the Shliach Tzibur is there to be motzi me, but I prefer to make it myself because maybe I won't have good kavana when I'm listening to him. V'chein, Bebedek Habayis Kosav Beis Yosef Simen Kuf Pei Gimel B'Shem Orchas Chaim B'Shem Harap Sheyesh L'Chalecha L'Vorech. I'm sorry, Birkas Hamazon. Excuse me. V'Chein B'Birkas Hamazon. The Beis Yosef writes Sheyesh L'Chalecha L'Vorech Birkas Hamazon Af Kishizanu L'Fi Shalot Ein Yachol L'Chavin Chulei. And then he quotes the Rambam, who says that the Rambam would not make the benching himself. He says there's a machlokus in the Rishonim as to whether it's preferable to bench on your own or to listen to the bracha of the person leading the zimun. But what you do see is that no one can tell you that it's dafka has to be one way or dafka has to be the other way. Hinei anuroin shebedavar zeh sheyuchal echad lotzeis bebirkas chavero ve'eno ratza bekach de'ein iser biyado. There's no iser for me just because I don't want to be yotzei with my friend's bracha that I'm doing anything wrong by making my own bracha. Kevin shekavanasa l'shem shamayim. What the Taz is alluding to is the fact that there's a spiritual advantage to both being yotzei someone else's bracha and to making the bracha yourself. Some say that it's better for you to say the bracha on your own so that you'll have better kavanah, and some say that it's better not to be marbe b'brachos, not to make brachos unnecessarily. So if someone else is making the bracha, that you should be yotzei. So there's a spiritual advantage, there's a halachic advantage to either way. But you can't tell me that one is asr and one is mutter. So it should be no different when my wife is lighting the menorah for me. The kol shekenu, kevin she'eno eitzel ishto, ve'eno shomei habracha shichol omer eno yotze b'berkas ishti, shelo b'fanai. The Taz says, I'll go even further. There's even a more compelling argument over here to say that there's an advantage to a person lighting and making the bracha himself. Because your wife is not here, you don't see her, you don't hear her bracha. He says, normally we require a person to hear the bracha and to listen to the bracha and to answer amen. And you need the person making the bracha to be in front to see the person that he's being motzi. He says, let's say your wife is about to light the menorah, and you say she's in a rush, she wants to get to the restaurant more quickly than you do. She says, that's it, that's unusual that she'd be ready before you, but let's say she is, okay? She gets ready before you and she says, I'm lighting the menorah before you because you're not ready yet. So you run downstairs in your bathrobe and you see she's lighting, she's making the bracha. Does that mean you don't have a right to say, I don't want to be yotzei with your bracha? Normally I light, right? And my wife is yotzei with my bracha. Let's say she preempts me, she lights first. Let's say I say, I don't want to be yotzei with her bracha. I don't have a right to do so. My child can light, even if he's not even bar mitzvah, he has a right to make his own bracha, and I don't have a right to make my own bracha. What's going on here? It doesn't make any sense. Even though the child would normally be yotzei with my bracha, but he still has a right to light on his own. He says, and that's why there's a minhag, says the Taz, that I've seen many people do this already. They take a menorah with them wherever they're going to travel. They take the neiros, and even though he knows that his wife is lighting for him at home, he has every right to light the menorah himself and make his own bracha. The apple pishen raya mizeh shaha b'nei bayis enam mechavim lahotzias abalabayis eles atzmo Maybe you'll argue that in that situation, they're not mechaven to be motzi him, but in a situation where my wife is mechaven to be motzi me, maybe I don't have a right to light the menorah. Mikol makam higufa kasha, lama lilikach haneros imo habenei bayis im ishto yachavnu v'yadliku alav. He says, but then that's the whole question is, why is it necessary for a man to take that? Why does he have such a minhag to begin with? If they're going to be lighting for me at home, why should I bother? He says, he says, therefore the Taz's conclusion is the Trumas Hadeshin is right on target. I can't understand the Beis Yosef, I can't understand the Mechaber, why he would have an aversion at all to a person wanting to take his own menorah on the road and light on his own. What's the big deal? Why is there a compelling reason not to in the first place? That's the question that the Ramah says, that the Taz says, I have on the Beis Yosef. I don't understand the Beis Yosef Bichlal. So if we take a look at the Chidah now, the Chidah is from the 18th century. The Chidah and the Birkei Yosef is going to try and defend the reasoning of the Beis Yosef. Why the Beis Yosef was against what the Trumas Hadeshin was advocating. Why the Beis Yosef feels it's not appropriate to make your own bracha if you know your wife is lighting for you at home. And he writes as follows. He says, first he quotes the Ramah, who says it's perfectly fine, you can make your own bracha, but then he quotes from the Maran Beit Yosef Kasav, Davi bracha she'eina tzricha. He writes, he quotes the Beis Yosef, and then he quotes the Taz, Amar al divrei Maran v'yichuya kedas Trumas Hadeshin, and he says, take a look at the Taz, and the Taz says the Trumas Hadeshin is 100% correct, and he leaves with a kasha on the Mechaber. Uve'emesh shesvaras Maran baset tzricha yishuv. And the truth is, we have to try and explain the Beis Yosef. The imze eina rotze lotzeis bahadlokas ishto v'rotze l'kaim mitzvah ba'atzmo lama lo yivarech. Why can't a guy just say, I don't want to be yotze with my wife's bracha, I want to do my own bracha? What's the big deal? Me'achar d'mekayim ha-mitzvah v'hu eina rotze lotzeis bahadlokas ishto u'michiyav lo ze lios kafuf lotzeis bahadlokas ishto. Since when is a guy obligated to be yotze with his wife's lighting? So it's such a strange, anomalous kind of principle that we only allow you to be yotze with your wife's bracha, even if you want to make your own bracha. It doesn't seem to make any sense. And he says, not only that, but I'll show you that the Mechaber himself is so certain himself. He says, V'harei maram la'el simen vav din dalet pasak yesh nogin sha'achar shebirech echad birkas ha'shachar v'anu achar abamein. The Mechaber brings a very interesting minhag that took place in his time. Remember, the Mechaber is a Sephardi. And you know that by the Sephardim, they say all of the tefillot out loud, right? So he says, the Mechaber brings, in Siman Vav, by the laws of Birchas HaShachar, he says that the custom was that one person would get up in the shul in the morning, he would say the Birchas HaShachar out loud, and everyone would answer Amen after him, and then Choser Echad Me Ha'onim Amen U'Mavarech Ba'onim Acharav Amen. And then another guy would get up and say the very same bracha, and everyone would answer Amen to his bracha. And they like do a round robin, where every person would say the bracha, everyone would answer Amen, and then next I would say the very same bracha, and everyone would answer Amen. Probably davening took 3 hours then. Maybe there was nothing else to do. I don't know. But the point is, it must have taken a very long time. He says, Ucheseder hazeh osim kol osam sha'anu amin ve'en la'arer aleihem v'chulei. And the Beis Yosef says, he says, not necessarily this is l'lechatchila, but it's nothing usher for them to do this. And the Beis Yosef himself writes, he says, even if the guy making the bracha out loud has kavanah, that I want to be motzi everyone in this bracha, but nevertheless, as long as the listeners are not themselves having kavanah to be yotze, they have a right to say, I'm going to make the bracha myself. And this is actually what we do also. The Shliach Tzibur says, the Birchas HaShachar, Hanosim Lasech Livina Lahachin Ben Yom Vein Laila, and the Mishnah Berurah writes that it's better for you to say the bracha yourself. So just if you hear him before you make the bracha, just have kavanah, not to be yotze. And shine. There's nothing wrong with that. Harei demarin gufei kiya minhag zeh shebechol yom na'anu kulam va'amru amein u'mahadri lebruche. You see that the Beis Yosef himself held that it was possible for a person to hold back on his being yotze if he wants to, as long as his kavanah is not to be yotze. Even if the person making the bracha for me has kavanah to be motzi me, like my wife, but as long as I'm not mechaven to be yotze, it doesn't harm me, right? It doesn't affect me. The gamzet tzavach kikruchia delavoy nafik achar ishto v'zeh kochol elokenu koch gaver l'kaim ha-mitzvah ba'atzmo. And we always say that it's always better for a person to do the mitzvah himself if he has the option. So again, it's like a bomb kasha on the machaber, like what's the issue here? He says, and I will grant you, says the Chida, that there are those, he's referring of course to the Ramah, who disagrees with the machaber and says that it's that you have every right to make the bracha yourself. Nispashet haminhag bekrachim va'ayaros gedolos kedivrei maran. The Chida writes, at least in the Sephardic community, the custom was to abide by the psak of the Beis Yosef that you don't light if you're not in your home. If you know your wife is lighting for you, then you don't light. You don't take your menorah with you, right? But the question still remains: if the Beis Yosef himself paskins that you're not forced to be yotzei with someone else's bracha, why does he have a problem with the Trumas Hadeshin? That's the question. Okay, then he quotes the Taz, and the Taz brings other rayas, etc. Now, let's see how the Chida, the Birkei Yosef, tries to answer this question. I would like to suggest a differentiation between this halacha of lighting the menorah and all of the other examples where if I don't want to be yotzei with someone else's bracha, I don't have to. And he says as follows: D'chol hanach bishas amiras chavero habracha hadavar taloi bo ditzarich lechavein lotzeis bebirkas chavero. That he says all the other examples, whether it's benching or whether it's birchas hashachar or whether it's all of the other or the birchas kriya shema by davening, there the mitzvah is upon me to make the bracha, and therefore I get to decide whether I want to be yotzei with your bracha or not. Vim lo kivein lo yas, if I don't have kavan, I'm not yotzei. Af shiachavin hamavarech lahotzio. Even when the person making the bracha has kavanah to be motzi, if I'm not mechavein, then it's no problem. The kaven shavo hadavar talui im lo kivein lotzei suberich la'atzmo lo havi bracha shenetzricha. Since it's up to me, I'm in the driver's seat in all of those aforementioned situations. If I have kavanah not to be yotzi with your bracha, that's my prerogative. Aval hacha she'ein talui bekavanaso klal. But by Neros Chanukah, it's not up to my kavanah. It's not dependent upon what I'm thinking as to whether the menorah is yotzi for me in my house or not. Ubein yechavein lotzeis bahadlokas ishto, bein lo yechavein, potir va'otir bahadlokas beso, umemela hu yotzei. It's a strange language, but he says basically the way it works is whether I have kavanah or not, when someone's lighting in my house, I'm automatically yotzei the mitzvah of hadlakas neiros for that night. It's not dependent upon my wishes, upon my will. When someone lights in my house, and they're a member of my household, then I've automatically, the mitzvah has been done. V'lo-shavki revacha l'didei d'liboi kavana lotzeis. There's no room for this person to say that it's a volitional issue, that if I want to, I can be yotzei. If I want to, I don't have to be yotzei. B'chihas avar maran da'vi bracha she'ena tzricha keiner li l'das maran. He says that's the way I believe is where the Beis Yosef is coming from. There's an automatic yotzei. Once a member of your household lights in your house, your mitzvah has been done, whether you want it or not.
Even if you're not there.
Even if you're not there.
And even if it's a katan, in this case?
That's less clear if it's a katan.
But
we'll see. We'll see. There's a good argument to make.
And what if you're there?
In a chinami, even if you're there. If, let's say, my wife preempts me and I'm still in my bathrobe and she runs down and lights before me, according to the Chida, what he's suggesting is, once, he's explained, this is the sheet of the Beis Yosef. Once it's been lit in my house, I've been yotzei. The mitzvah is done. So we have to be magdir. How does it work? Like the Birkei Yosef sort of left us hanging. So fine, you've made this distinction, but why does that distinction hold true? What's unique about this particular mitzvah that it's not dependent upon my kavanah? That's really what we have to sort of still explain, which we really haven't explained yet.
Is different than the other brachas?
I don't know. That's a good question. The question would be is, let's say my wife lit for me in my house the first night. What about the second night that I'm home? Do I have to make the shechiyanu or not? I think we paskin that you do make the shechiyanu, but I have to go back and check the halacha. Don't quote me on this. I have to really go back and look it up. I don't know. Yes.
Well, most brachos, when somebody's being most of you and you have to provide, you have to be in the same room. Isn't that the thing? Isn't this a difference here? That you're next to a different
It's also anomalous, yes, that normally, unless you're Mamana Shaliach, you can be Mamana Shaliach to do a mitzvah for you, to deliver a get for you, to do many different kinds of mitzvahs that are not required. Your goof is not required in the mitzvah, and you could fulfill the mitzvah yedei shaliach even if you're not present.
Isn't this more mitzvah than for gufo?
Well, that's what we have to see. In other words, you're seeing already that this is not a mitzvah shetoloi begufo, because it's not like putting on a pair of tefillin. I can't be mamana shliach to put tefillin on for me, right? So it's not a mitzvah that's totally begufo mamish, because otherwise I couldn't have a shaliach do it for me. It's not something like eating matzah, right? But it could have to do with other forms of mitzvahs where it's not necessary for me to be a part of the actual performance, as long as I'm a man shliach and the mitzvah gets done. Yeah.
You have to make the
One second, Mr. Gruden. Yes.
If one has two houses, does each house have to have its own?
That's also a good question. I think the post can discuss that issue as well. But we'll have to see. First of all, we have to define what the mitzvah is first. Yes? The mitzvah is persume nisa. So is the nispar saying by having it lit, so is that, so again, is it my mitzvah? Whose mitzvah is it if it's not my mitzvah? That's the question. So take a look at the Pnei Yehoshua.
Hasn't times changed?
Take a look at the Pnei Yehoshua. 1 second. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan mitzvah Channukah ner ish ubeso. Even the language of the Gemara implies that there's something unique about this mitzvah. A candle, a man in his house. Since when is there a mitzvah on my house? Well, like you suggested, Shlomi, there's a mitzvah of mezuzah, right? He says, "Nira demashin ishtana mitzvah zu mishar mitzvahs shehin chovas haguf shahayichiv al kol yachid v'yachid." He says this mitzvah is different from other mitzvahs where there's an obligation on the person himself. Dekaimal nami mitzvah bo yosem ibashlucho. When there's a mitzvah on you yourself to do, then even when you can fulfill it via a shaliach, we say that it's better to do it yourself than via proxy. Ela deshaini hacha she'ein hacha ikar hamitzvah. Ela besamach l'rishus harabim shumi shum pirsumei nisa. But like Mr. Gruda said, the mitzvah here is to publicize the miracle of Channukah. This is not a personal mitzvah that it's incumbent upon me as a Jew, but it's incumbent upon that the mitzvah is publicized. The miracle of Channukah is publicized. That's not a mitzvah on me. It's a mitzvah on making sure that the world knows about the miracle of Channukah and that the lights are exposed to the public. And therefore, on that basis, mishum kach itilu chova mitzvah zu ki'ilu hu chovas habayis. And therefore, the mitzvah is on my house. As a homeowner, people walk and drive past my house all the time. And so just like I have the Kiddush Hashem to make to keep my lawn manicured, I have an obligation as a homeowner, who is in the public view, to fulfill this mitzvah. But as long as my house is having that mitzvah publicized, it's no longer a mitzvah upon me per se. And that would help us understand at least why the Chidah makes this distinction. He says, because it's not a mitzvah haguf, when there's a mitzvah haguf, then we say mitzvah bo yoser mi bishlucho. Then I can decide whether I want to be yotze via proxy or not. It's my mitzvah, it's my prerogative to decide how I want to do the mitzvah. But when the mitzvah is not for me to do, but it's to make sure that the miracle of Channukah is publicized, as long as my home is publicizing the miracle, I fulfill the mitzvah. And therefore, I don't have a right, according to the Beis Yosef, to make a bracha anymore. Let's hold on, let's continue. The Sfas Emes, on the same Gemara. He says, V'yesh la'ayin. The Sfas Emes says, on his commentary to the Gemara, Iha mitzvah ner echad b'bayis kemo mezuzah, right? Is the mitzvah, if there's a mitzvah of only one candle per house, just like there's a mitzvah of mezuzah, u'chemo ner Shabbos t'chol shehidlik l'shem Shabbos av shehidlik mi sheyiyeh dai, just like by the mitzvah of halakas neiros shel Shabbos. Whoever lights in my house, as long as the neiros were lit in my house, that's mastik. There's not a requirement for specifically the wife of the house to light. He says, therefore, let's say you have two balabatim who share living quarters. You have two guys who are roommates. Okay? Dai lahem b'ner echad. They would only need one menorah. You don't need two guys to light, even though they're not members of the same household, but if they're living in the same house, then it's okay for them to light just one menorah. Okay, so now let's think about this for a second. When a guy says, I want to be mishtatef, and the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah require a person to give, and based on the Gemara, if you're a guest at someone's house, you're giving the guy coins. You're becoming a shutaf. So what are you becoming a shutaf in? Are you becoming a shutaf in the oil? Or are you becoming a shutaf in the house? So let's see what the Sfas Emes says. Yesh lomer shehu kidei lasos hamitzvah b'mamono avo midina yotze. He says, so one way of saying it is that you can be mamana the balabayas, your shaliach, and you don't need to have him to pay for the mitzvah. And therefore he could light for you, and it's not a problem. But it's preferable to have a chelik in the cost of doing the mitzvah. O nema de ha-mitzvah al kol ha'adam ela de balabayas motzi kol b'nei bayis. You could also say that it's a mitzvah on me, it's a mitzvah on you, but I'm making you my shaliach, so I'll give you money to help. Aval im ken kasha pshita d'chol mitzvah yochel lahotzi chaveiro. But I don't understand, why then do you have to give the guy money? We'll skip the brackets. The nafkamina lefi hanal b'mahadrin. I kol echad matzi levarech di imitam shlichus im ken ha-mahadrin ein machavin lahotzi or rashai kol echad levarech. He says a very important nafkamina of this whole halach is going to be if you want to be mahadrin, where we say that every household member should light his own menorah. And there we say that the mahadrin are, no one is machavin to be motzi the other. Everyone's machavin to light his own menorah. Everyone can make his own bracha. Aval iha mitzvah rak al habayis ve'en tzarech kavan lahotzi im kein al mitzvahs hidr bilvad eno yachol or eno yodeya yirishai levarich. Hagam de yesh lomer dekach tiknu v'gam ze b'chol hamitzvah v'shayach alav bracha af eno mechuyav v'kol makom shayach b'tzivanu k'dematzina b'kama duchti. So the question that sort of the Sfas Emes leaves off with is, how can we, if the mitzvah is on the house, like we're suggesting in the Beis Yosef, how then can we do the Mahadrin custom that the Gemara advocates, which is breaking every person up and having each member of the household light? If the mitzvah is on the house and not on me personally, so fine. The Chazal made the special provision that even though the mitzvah is on the house, you add to the publicizing of the miracle by having every person light. So instead of just having one menorah per house, you have multiple menorahs. There's even more light. There's even more miracles that's being publicized in your house. But still, how could you say that Sivanu? In other words, that's the problem. He says it's not a bracha levatala, because he says I'll solve the problem of bracha levatala, because when Chazal made the takana, they said that you can do a mahadrin form of the mitzvah by having more menorahs per household. Granted, the essential mitzvah is one menorah, right? If you want to do more, that's perfectly fine. He says, and even if you could sanction making a bracha because you're adding to the Persume Nisa, but how could you say Vitzivanu? Because Vitzivanu, it doesn't seem to work, because Vitzivanu means I'm obligated, but here I'm not obligated, I'm just adding on to the Persume Nisa. Okay.
She's saying Shas Nisim is okay.
It would seem that Shas Nisim would be okay for everyone to say, right? It would seem that Shas Nisim is okay, but it would seem like the Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvah Vitzivanu should not be okay. Now, let's go on to Shulchan Aruch and look at another interesting halacha in Hilchas Channukah. Isha madlekas, in source number 11, Siman Tafresh Ayin Hey. Isha madlekas ner Channukah. Sha'at hi chayeves ba. A woman lights Neros Channukah because she's also obligated. Why? Because she was Sha'at heim hayu ba'osa hanes. Women were part of the miracle as well. There's two ways of learning what Sha'at heim hayu ba'osa hanes. It's a very famous machlokas in the Rishonim of what Sha'at heim hayu ba'osa hanes means. It either means that their lives were also saved, just like the men's lives, and therefore they have the same obligation to thank God for the Ribono Shel Olam. Another explanation is that they were an integral part of the miracle, because For both Purim, there was Esther, and for Channukah, there was this woman named Yehudis, Bas Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who was responsible for killing the general Holofernes. Okay. So in any event, that's why a woman should light her own menorah. Aval, im hidlika cheresh shoyte v'katan lo asa klum, ve'afal pi shehinicha gadol. If a person who is of unsound mind lights the menorah, that doesn't count, because you need das when you light the menorah. Even if an adult, a lucid person, places the menorah down after the lighting. V'yesh mi sha'omer b'katan shehigia l'chinoch mutar. Who asked that question about a child? Right, who was? Yes. So the question is, what about a child? So some say that if a child is 11 years old, 10 years old, 9 years old, and they're educable and they have enough lucidity to know that there's a mitzvah of Channukah, that child could be motzi. That child could light for the entire house. And the Ramah says, is according to the minhag of Mahadran, where everyone in the household lights, and a child should certainly light. But notice that the Mechaber says that a katan can light for the entire household, which is normally not the case. You can't have a katan be motzi you in a mitzvah. Let's look at the Chacham Tzvi. Okay. So the question that was asked of the Chacham Tzvi, Sha'alta leparish lecha ma ben Channukah shepasak de katan shegiya lechinach motzi es gadol es hagadol. You asked the question, why is it that the Shulchan Aruch, I think he's referring to the Shulchan Aruch, why does the Shulchan Aruch paskin, or maybe he's talking about the Beis Yosef, or maybe the Levush, it's not clear. He says, why did he paskin that when a katan reaches the age of chinuch, even before his bar mitzvah, he could be motzi an adult? But why is that different from Purim? Shepasak huzal kichol sha'ar haposkim. Uchatanakama de Rabbi Yehuda shaf shehigia lechinuch ena motzi es harabim yedei chavasam. Why is it that the Shulchan Aruch paskins by Purim that a katan can't read the Megillah? Why is it that a katan can light the menorah for the house, but a katan can't read the Megillah for people and be motzi them? What's the difference? They're both rabbinic mitzvahs. They're both of the same genre of mitzvah. Tshuva. Svirale de b'Chanukah, kaven de lav akarkafta de gavra, mutal chiyav hahadlaka, ela echad mikol b'nei habayis madlik, b'fesach hachotzer. V'shuv ein shum chiyav al shum echad mikol b'nei habayis. He says this is not a mitzvah that is upon a person's head. This is not a head mitzvah. It's not on the individual. But rather it's that every person in the house should light by the doorway to publicize the miracle. So therefore it turns out that we as household members are obligated, but my obligation to light is as a member of the household, not as an individual Jew. So it's only when I'm a member of this particular household do I have a mitzvah to light the menorah. Right? He says, Afal pi shelo shamu havracha v'lo ra'u hahadlaka. And therefore, we're all yotzei, even if we didn't hear the bracha, and we didn't see the lighting, but if I'm part of the household where the menorah was lit, I'm yotzei the mitzvah. Ve'adifa minei amar Rabbi Zera, keven din sivna amina lo, sulo tzrichna. And let's go back to the Gemara the Chacham Tzvi says. Remember the Gemara that we started with? Rabbi Zera had said that once I got married and I was in the yeshiva for the night, I don't even have to be mishtatef with the balabas to give him the prutas, to give him money. Why? Because so he says that's the reason why. He says that's the reason why a katan can light for the house. It's not a mitzvah that's on the individual. It's a mitzvah on the members of the household. And a katan is as much a member of the household, right, contrary to what I tell my kids. I tell my kids, this house is mine. You're only a tenant in my home, right? And that is true when I need to get into their room for something. But for this particular mitzvah, well, that's why they're living rent-free, so they owe me. I want to make sure that they know that they owe me. That's the line that I use. I don't know. Am I the only one that uses that? No. Okay. But the point is that for this mitzvah, my child, my 11-year-old boy chick, is as much a member of the house as I am. We're equals when it comes to being members of the house for this particular mitzvah. And that's why even though, you see, he's not being motzi me, he is, as a member of the household, lighting for the house. And therefore, I can be yotze with his hadlaka, because my mitzvah is tied into my house, being the publicizer. He says, "Aval b'kriyas hamegillah, hamutal kol echad ve'echad likros o lishma hamegillah, ein katan af she'higia lechinach motzias harabim." He says, but when it comes to reciting the Megillah, that's a mitzvah on each and every Jew. So your chiyuv is less than mine, so you can't be motzi my chiyuv. My chiyuv is as an adult. Your chiyuv is as a katan she'higia lechinuch. You can't be motzi me. So therefore, v'chilik zeh miskabel al hadas nirali. He says it's a very mistavridik chiluk, and that's the reason why it works by Channukah. Just very quickly, we'll take just...
So why does he only say that for a cotton, but not for a cherish and a shota?
Because there has to be some das. There has to be some das to know that what you're doing is hadlakas ner shel Channukah. The problem, the chisaron of a cherish shota v'katan, is that they're, for all I know, they're just lighting a match for kicks, you know. They're not even aware of what they're doing. The nafkamina would also be, by the way, laser. Let's say a person is a misasek ba'alma. Let's say a person is just, he's lighting a match, and he holds it up, and he holds it in front of the window. His kavan is not for ner shel Channukah. So you can't say in that situation, you need some das of the performer to know that he's doing a mitzvah shel Channukah, even though it's for the sake of the household, right? It's mistaver that way, yes?
That's why it has to be a katan she'higia lechinuch.
That's why it's got to be a katan she'higia lechinuch, yeah.
Does he have to know that he's, by doing this, that he is yotze the house, that the action is not personal and it is actually covering the whole house?
I don't know. I don't know that he has to necessarily, as long as it seems like from the halach, as long as he knows that he's fulfilling the mitzvah of Pirsumei Nisa, the household is covered. I don't know that he has to have any specific other das, that he's doing it for the sake of the household.
And this would include a ketana also?
Mistama, there's no difference in the mitzvah of Channukah. Shafein hayu ba'osanes. Yeah.
But he might not have visited because the last time the visit said at least there's...
Because he's not a member of my household. That's exactly the point. He's a guest. He's a visitor. This is a mitzvah that's mutal. It's a mitzvah that's on the household. And as you need two requirements. It's got to be in my house and by a member of my household to do it. When he gives me the prutas, it's not just that he's joining, like we saw in the Sfas Emes, it's not just that he's joining together with me for the mitzvah. He's becoming a tenant and becoming a member of the household. That's the way we would look at it, licha'ora. Even though it's not so clear in the language of the Sfas Emes, but licha'ora, that's the reason why there's a requirement for him to give the money. Now, so look, nafkamina, there are a number of nafkaminas. Number one is that if I'm going to be flying in the middle of Channukah and I'm going to miss the night of Hadlaka, if my wife is at home, don't worry, she's coming on the mission. But if my wife is at home, she can light for me, and even if my katan is at home, right, he can light for me also. And he can be motzi the whole household, and I don't have to worry about, the airport where I'm going to light, right? Now, you could say there's an inyan of Pirsumei Nisa, that if I can find a place to light Gesundheit, but it's for sure would have to be without a bracha, according to this svara. And hasvara nosenes, that we know that the mitzvah was dafka niskan. There are only two places that you're allowed to light with a bracha. One is in your home, and one is in the Beis HaKnesses, b'shas mincha and ma'ariv. Those are the only two places. That's why I get this question a lot, is that, Rabbi, we're making a simcha, we're making a bar mitzvah, we're making a chasana, and it's over. We want to light the menorah at the reception. Fine, light the menorah at the reception, sing Ma'os Tzur. But you can't make a bracha. That's not near Yishu Beso. That's a bracha levatala, as far as the poskim are concerned, because that's not the way Chazal were mitaking the bracha. You're not going to make it back in time, so you'll get back from the chasana, you'll get back 10, 11 o'clock, and you and your wife will light, and whoever else is still awake will partake in the Pirsumei Nisa. But the mitzvah is for the household, not to light or to be yotze the lighting at a simcha. But it's the same principle. It's the same principle. And so if you're traveling and you know that someone's home to light, then you're okay. The question will become, what if I'm flying to Eretz Yisrael and I'm leaving no one at home? So what I can do is that I can give some prutas to my neighbor who I know is going to be lighting. I say, I want to become a tenant of your home. So then I become a tenant of his home, and his lighting will work for me because I'm a member of his bias now. So that would be one remedy if there's no other possibility, another option. He says that's why we're lenient over here that a woman can light on behalf of her husband who's out of town, that her lighting covers the entire household, including her husband who's traveling, because it's the household mitzvah, not the individual mitzvah. Okay, that's the basic. That's the bottom line. Okay, so I think without beating a dead horse, you get the basic principle that it really is halacha lamaisa. There's definitely now we still paskin like the Ramah. If you really feel that you would like to take your menorah along and light your own menorah when you're on the road, and you have a place where you can set it down and you can be mefarsing the nes, go right ahead. But you should also know that you're not mechuyev to do that. If you know your wife is lighting the menorah at home, you can have peace of mind knowing that you're yotzei the mitzvah because you're part of that household.